The Continental System, an audacious gambit. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of the French, was a master strategist. He dreamed of crushing his arch-rival, Great Britain, his weapon of choice, the Continental System, a blockade designed to strangle Britain's economy. Implemented in 1806, this audacious plan aimed to cut off British trade with all of Europe. Napoleon envisioned a continent united against the island nation, crippling its industry and forcing it to its knees. The fate of Europe hung in the balance as the Continental System took hold. The success of Napoleon's plan hinged on the cooperation of European nations. Many, like Russia and Spain, initially complied, fearing French might. However, the seeds of resistance were sown from the outset. Smuggling, corruption, and economic hardship fueled resentment towards the blockade. The Continental System, intended to be Napoleon's masterstroke, would ultimately contribute to his downfall. Napoleon's Continental System was more than just an economic measure. It was a key element of his grand strategy for European domination. He understood Britain's economic and naval power. He knew that to defeat Britain, he had to strike at its heart, its trade-dependent economy. The Continental System aimed to cripple British industry by closing off its access to European markets. This, Napoleon believed, would weaken Britain's ability to wage war and solidify his control over the continent. The blockade was also a tool of political control. By forcing European nations to comply with the system, Napoleon sought to assert his dominance and undermine British influence. He aimed to create a Europe subservient to France, economically and politically. The Continental System therefore represented Napoleon's ambition to reshape the European order according to his vision. Implementing the Continental System proved a daunting task. Napoleon's empire, though vast, could not effectively patrol the entire European coastline. He relied on a complex web of decrees, inspections, and punishments to enforce the blockade. French agents were stationed at ports across Europe, tasked with intercepting British goods and ensuring compliance. Neutral ships suspected of trading with Britain were seized and their cargo confiscated. The blockade's impact was immediate and far-reaching. British exports plummeted and its economy suffered a severe blow. Prices of essential goods rose across Europe, leading to shortages and hardship. The Continental System, designed to weaken Britain, also inflicted considerable pain on the continent itself. Great Britain, facing an existential threat, responded to the Continental System with defiance. The Royal Navy, the mightiest naval force in the world, imposed its own blockade on French-controlled ports. British ships roamed the seas, intercepting French and neutral vessels suspected of violating the blockade. The British government also sought to open new markets for its goods, particularly in South America and the Ottoman Empire. Crucially, Britain encouraged smuggling operations to circumvent the Continental System. British merchants, aided by smugglers, found ways to get their goods into Europe through various clandestine routes. The British government even provided subsidies and protection to smugglers, recognizing their vital role in undermining Napoleon's blockade. Section 5. Cracks in the edifice, the Iberian ulcer and Russian resistance. Despite initial successes, the Continental System began to unravel. Napoleon's invasion of Portugal in 1807, aimed at closing a key loophole in the blockade, backfired spectacularly. The British, allied with Portugal, resisted fiercely, dragging France into a protracted and costly conflict in the Iberian Peninsula. This Iberian ulcer, as Napoleon called it, drained French resources and manpower, weakening his grip on Europe. Meanwhile, Russia, feeling the economic strain of the blockade and wary of Napoleon's growing power, began to defy the Continental System openly. Tsar Alexander I's decision to resume trade with Britain in 1810 dealt a significant blow to Napoleon's plans. The Continental System, already riddled with loopholes and undermined by British resilience, was crumbling. Section 6. The smuggler's paradise, undermining the blockade. The Continental System's effectiveness was further hampered by widespread smuggling. The lure of profit proved too strong to resist for many merchants and traders across Europe. British goods, highly sought after despite the ban, found their way into the continent through a network of clandestine routes. Smugglers, operating on land and sea, exploited every loophole and bribed corrupt officials to get their cargo through. Napoleon's efforts to stamp out smuggling proved largely futile. The vastness of the European coastline, coupled with the complicity of local populations and even some officials, made it an impossible task. The thriving black market not only undermined the blockade, but also fueled resentment towards French authority. Section 7. Economic upheaval. Europe feels the pinch. The Continental System, while intended to cripple Britain, inflicted significant economic damage on Europe itself. The blockade disrupted established trade patterns, leading to shortages of essential goods, particularly manufactured products that Britain excelled at producing. Prices soared, and unemployment rose as industries reliant on British markets suffered. The blockade also stifled innovation and economic development on the continent. With British competition largely absent, there was little incentive for continental industries to modernize or improve their products. The Continental System, ironically, hindered the very economic progress Napoleon hoped to achieve for France and its allies. Section 8. Seeds of discontent, social unrest and political instability. The economic hardship caused by the Continental System fueled social unrest and political instability across Europe. Ordinary citizens, struggling to afford basic necessities, grew resentful of the blockade and the French authorities enforcing it. Protests and riots erupted in several cities, challenging Napoleon's authority. The blockade also exacerbated existing tensions between France and its allies and client states. Resentment towards French interference in their internal affairs and economies grew, undermining Napoleon's efforts to forge a unified Europe under his leadership. The Continental System, meant to strengthen Napoleon's grip on Europe, was, in fact, loosening it. Section 9. The walls close in, Napoleon's empire besieged. By 1812, the Continental System was in tatters. The Iberian ulcer continued to bleed French resources, while Russia's defiance had emboldened other nations to resist the blockade. Smuggling was rampant, and the economic hardship inflicted by the system had sown the seeds of discontent across Europe. Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812, driven in part by his desire to punish Tsar Alexander I for defying the Continental System, proved to be the turning point. The French army, decimated by the Russian winter and relentless attacks, retreated in disarray. This humiliating defeat shattered Napoleon's aura of invincibility and emboldened his enemies. Section 10. Legacy of failure, the unraveling of a dream. The failure of the Continental System had far-reaching consequences for Napoleon and Europe. The economic hardship it caused, coupled with the resentment it generated, contributed to the erosion of Napoleon's power base. His enemies, emboldened by his setbacks, united against him, ultimately leading to his downfall in 1814. The Continental System also left a lasting legacy on European politics and economics. It highlighted the interconnectedness of European economies and the importance of international trade. The blockade's failure demonstrated the limits of economic warfare and the resilience of market forces. Section 11. Conclusion: the Continental System's enduring significance. Napoleon's Continental System, an audacious attempt to cripple Great Britain through economic warfare, ultimately failed to achieve its objectives. Its impact, however, extended far beyond its immediate economic consequences. It shaped the political landscape of Europe, fueled social unrest, and contributed to the downfall of one of history's most iconic figures. The Continental System serves as a reminder of the complex interplay between economics, politics, and warfare. It highlights the unintended consequences of grand strategies and the resilience of nations facing existential threats. The story of the Continental System, though ultimately a tale of failure, offers valuable lessons about the limits of power and the enduring importance of international cooperation.